Hello, Racial Change family. My name is Tomlins Nyback, and this is 365 Days Towards Racial Change. It's day 173 kicking off here. We're just moving right along. This is a later post, so you might get two back to back in you'll see it in your mailbox. I apologize. I had an activity today, and that really taxes my stamina. I'm working on it. Anyway, to maintain the commitment, here I am. Let's get into it. We're here talking about black issues, race matters, and stuff like that. Particularly in America, historical institutions, implications from slavery, stereotypes, all this stuff. We might even bring in the weather one of these days. Um, Two major thoughts. We got a lot to get to, so let me just rush through the standard introduction. Today, I'm thinking about the black mind, what this project addresses. The black mind, how that is, how that presents itself in the world. Is it um, a slave mind? Is it still under assault, under attack? Does it still behave oh in ways that affirm privation, vulnerability, being controlled in a sense. Flip side of the same coin is for the white mind and the expectation of entitlement, privilege, power, um, not and control, not just in America and the world. My second huge burden is for financial literacy. Today's word is cash flow. What's more important, uh, principle or cash flow? I'm starting to get my mind changed around a lot of uh, finances, how finances work. I'm learning that and it's very in a very real way, cash flow may be more important than obtaining principle. If these terms don't make any sense, don't worry. Take Google them and work through them. But follow me just briefly here. Uh, you can have, I can lend you $10, and I'll say $10 with interest, and you could keep chipping away and paying me interest on that $10, and you may never ever again come into a big chunk of money at $10 in your life, but you'll always have a little trickling in some type of monetary movement in your lifetime. 50 cents here, 30 cents. Well, think about that. Over years, if you consistently pay that, you'll have paid me hundreds of dollars and never have paid me my big chunk, my $10 chunk. And that's the way a lot of economic, that's the way the economic machine, part of it, and that it's an aspect of the way the economic machine works in the world. Now, if you think about that on the terms of when you get into billions and trillions of dollars, uh, you're just looking at interest payments. Well, these numbers can be staggering, and never see the principal repaid. I wonder, from what I'm learning now, I wonder if principles even really exist. Now, that's a kind of a bold statement from the information that I'm reading, because from the information I'm reading, the principle never existed. Big long conversation, and maybe after I get done this year about Black Matters and things like that, we'll I'll test my hand at money in America and the world. Now, I'm inspired by a man named Dr. Claude Anderson. He's written 3 great works. Please get these books, especially this one, A Black History Reader, 101 Questions You Never Thought to Ask, Black Labor, White Wealth, Search for Power and Economic Justice, and Dr. Anderson's National Plan to Empower Black America, Powernomics. You can find Dr. Anderson at powernomics.com and the Heritage Institute in Washington, D.C. Behind me, you'll see a hashtag #US2 symbol. Find black women there conversing, supporting one another. Check out Black Enough, BLAGGENUF, for a kind of a black Facebook experience. If you can't find your flavor out here in the world, yeah, I mean, come on, it's the internet, then do what I did, start your own voice here. And finally, I won't hold up the book today. You see it, you can see it almost every video. Uncle Tom's Cabin, we take a fictional look at slave life in America. From that, there's a lot of factual experiences in the fictional work, but from them we look at and dissect some of those circumstances and the lives of the characters, which we're going to do today in a very pointed and focused way. Um, we're in part 2, chapter 18, very dense chapter, Ophelia's experiences. It's very important, think of Ophelia. Harriet Beecher Stowe is using the Ophelia character as kind of a journalist in the Deep South to report on conditions of slave life. And we left Ophelia. She's done some house cleaning. She came down from Vermont to take care of Eva Marie St. Clair, look after the house. She's the head house mistress from up north, and so she has northern sensibilities, order, and whatnot, and these come into play as she goes through her her experience, and it's a lot of rubbing, friction, and grating on her. She's going head to head with Dinah. Dinah's the head cook, and Dinah's haphazard, well, her organizational skills appear haphazard to us, but not to Dinah. Like people like that. You look at my life, I'll be like, don't touch that, it's right where I need it to. So that's Dinah's experience, but it grates, it's rubbing, making some friction between her and Ophelia. But Ophelia wins the day because Dinah's a slave, and Ophelia's a white woman. Even though Ophelia is a white woman from the north, the free north, uh, black slaves their mind is they're beholden to all white people. There's no, they don't have any sense of their identity isn't such that they distinguish between a white person from the north and a white person from the south. All white people are in control and deserve to be called massa and stuff like that. So Ophelia wins the day. She's backed by St. Clair and all this, and but that's not the dynamic that goes on. It's not like if I see the manager at my work, like my manager is white, and so in my thinking, all white people have managerial skills. So it's not like that at all. There's no endorsement that Ophelia needs on the St. Clair plantation to give and validate her authority in that space. She has white skin. That's all. That's it. Get that in your mind. It's not even because she's St. Clair's cousin. That family ties and endorsements don't come into play. She's a white woman, therefore Dinah ultimately submits very easily. Uh, so the Clash of the Titans, Ophelia, Dinah. Dinah, she does. Harriet Beecher Stowe does give Dinah some leeway there, and she's like, uh, Dinah does clean up the place every once in a while. Everybody does. You got to. It can get pretty hazardous if you never clean your place, never do some empty out some space. So that's important to know that Dinah's not totally undisciplined in the St. Clare home. Now, this interaction between Ophelia and Dinah brings on some pretty dense philosophical discussions and debates. And I find this interesting. Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author, she's really revealing a lot of her depth of character, but possibly some higher disciplined education, maybe a specific uh, philosophical trainings, beyond uh, any biblical allegiances and things like that. She's the sole author, and so we're going to talk about in these last few minutes um, some very interesting philosophical concepts here, and I hope I can nail it. I hope I'm revealing her mind as we go through this. Ophelia is just fed up. This interaction with Dinah is the tip of the iceberg about some growing tensions that Ophelia is having in the St. Clare home. And it's an adjustment period. Honeymoon's over, time to go to work. It's a natural, some natural steps going on there. So Ophelia, um, she's starting to break, and she goes to St. Clare, and she is um, trying to reason with this man because he has a ultimate say. It's his space. He's not one to micromanage. We're going to see this in a moment. He's not really hands on, but if he ever put his foot down, that's going to be the end of the discussion. Otherwise, the plantation kind of runs on autopilot. And so this is some of the frustrations Ophelia's having with St. Clare, who's just relaxed and nonchalant. He's got the money, resources. The place ain't burning down. He's cool. He's totally okay with that. He's apathetic, content with the way the plantation's running. His balance sheets are in the black. Everything's cool. So why rock the boat? Why get so uptight about how slaves are responding or how they keep the kitchen? He knows Dinah keeps the rolling pin under the bed. The rolling pin that she probably makes biscuits every day with is stashed under the bed. He doesn't care. uh, Nutmeg, to spice up things, and condiments share space in her pocket with with Dinah's tobacco. That's the kind of guy St. Clare is. It's all right. Leave it alone. Um, and this brings us a discussion. So Ophelia's like, with all this undisciplined behavior, what about a slave's integrity? And at this, St. Clare, he gives two interesting reasons off the cuff, and he launches into some pretty deep philosophical revelations about himself concerning his attitude toward the slaves. He says, one, the slave from his mother's breast uh, feels that the slave feels they get things through subterfuge, dishonesty, being underhanded, using trickery, and whatnot. He says slaves are just born like that. That's how they get their needs met ultimately. So, the black man. Here's some stereotypes beginning. The black man and woman just can't be trusted. Now, remember, St. Clare's okay with that, you know, but we are seeing like this book had some prominence in its day, and it's informing the general public about stereotypes and whatnot. It's codifying. These things are now being written down. It's not hearsay on the streets from plantation to plantation and networks and things like that. This is a well-read book, so when they hit this section and see St. Clare's mind, this is going to inform the public much more. Um, so that's one point, and he says for honesty, honesty is a tricky thing for St. Clare to explain because honesty implies uh, he relates honesty to ownership of space and things like that. He says honesty, that the slaves are devoid of honesty because they have no sense of real ownership of stuff and themselves. It doesn't, honesty isn't a big, huge issue with St. Clare, because, his closest aide, his butler, Mr. Adolf, wears St. Clare's clothes and all that. But for Mr. Adolf, it's not like Mr. Adolf is taking taking his master's clothes. Him and his master are one. He is a he's kind of a shadow of his master, an image of his master in black skin. Adolf has no Mr. Adolf has no personal identity from which to be honest or dishonest. His life is consumed in his master's life. If you ever saw the movie Django Unchained, stars Jamie Foxx, has Leonardo DiCaprio, a lot of great actors in it. Samuel Jackson plays a slave in that same manner, and there's a part where Leonardo DiCaprio is slave master, and he owns the Samuel Jackson character. And when Leonardo DiCaprio is killed in the movie, Samuel Jackson is destroyed. Almost as though he has been, he's the one that's been shot. You know, and they're acting, but that's how slave life is to the real committed, dedicated slave. There's no sense of self, so there's no honesty or dishonesty to mention because slave and master are one. Master is it just controls that relationship. All right, I hope I've explained that uh, uh, well. This whole slavery thing in America, it turned a lot of things upside down in man's relation to man, man's treatment of man, respect. A lot of things went out the window. You remember, slavery slavery in America was just a new kind of slavery. I mean, we can find history before slavery in America that maybe was brutal and all that, but American slavery was mind control, physical control, space control, spiritual control. A lot of heavy duty things were happening in America for slavery. And some of these dynamics are just very new. You know, we're talking about issues of things like Stockholm syndrome. Where uh, the captive person that identifies so much with their captor that an allegiance, a love springs forth. That's the level, the kind of psychological damage that was going on with slaves and black folks. Hence, with some of my part of my introduction, I guess every day on these posts has to deal with the mind of black folks. You know, does this go away after hundreds of years of practice, oppression, implementation, institutionalization? So St. Clare, and conversely, the white mind. St. Clare's mind about the inseparable unity of slave and master, the identity, you know, is the white entitlement privilege. He's smoking back casually, philosophizing, being philosophical about the destruction of an individual based on the color of their skin. Incredible. It's coming from a fictional book, but the sources, what's informing this interaction, uh, you know, as a non-fictional basis. Incredible here. And he's bewildered by Tom, actually. Tom's the exception. He knows gives him his change. Tom does what he says he's going to do. So he is scratching his head at this enigma named Tom that he bought, which uh, may have some impact later on. We'll see. I read the text, but I don't want to be a spoiler. But so Tom is a great exception. He doesn't. St. Clair's not expecting. I used to. I work with dogs. I know how to work with dogs. The bigger the dogs, the better. Larger group, the better. Dogs have expected behavior. I'll sit back and nothing surprises me. And from knowing this, I can anticipate and I can stave off fights and look out for the weaker ones, the older ones. All this very important. You know, um, very important. So St. Clair's attitude towards the slaves is that um, you know he's justified further here. This is page. Well, I shouldn't give you page numbers because not everybody has this specific text, but further down he talks about being in very good company about his attitude towards the slaves. And this is because Ophelia is from the north and she's questioning the slave institution. She feels they should all be ashamed of this practice and all that. Now remember, the north isn't all that inclusive of slavery. They There's a separate but equal idea up north. They're not just cozy bedfellows with black people necessarily up north. It's just that black people have more liberty and whatnot, which is problematic. If we're putting it in the context of whites giving blacks some type of giving blacks freedom. That's not that's not a great way to house that dynamic either. But anyway, so she's condemning the practice in the South. Anyway, see, the South is doing openly what is kind of more implied and concealed up north. But St. Clair's like, look, England, plenty other nations around the earth through history have had slaves, and further, uh, the lower class are have always been used up for the purposes of those upper class people in power. That's just the way it is. That's how life flows. The lower class, lower people, poverty-stricken folks are like Duracell batteries. Remember the Matrix? You know, they're just use up that carcass to enrich us, fill our pockets. I work for a great company, yet that's can't get around that. That's part of my function for temporarily in the world. You know, uh, they get much more out of me um, than I get from them. Put it that way. But St. Clair feels justified about that. Let me finish with a quick word about existentialism. No, I'm labeling St. Clair as an existentialist, and an existentialist is an individual who believes that human existence is to be is free and self-determined. Hence, the root word existence is in there. If you ever think about if someone drops a big term, existentialism, or on you, existentialist, just take that root word existence, and that'll get your mind going. They're referring simply to the here now, tangible space. What's the existence? And in that existence, to have freedom and to self-determine, move in your own space, in your own way. I count St. Clair as that just because his entitlement, the way he lives his life, is free and self-determined. He's he's indicting himself because he's snatching that right, that privilege away. Well, it's a right, I should say, not a privilege. He's snatching that right away from his slaves. As much as his slaves enjoy the plantation and get along well and whatnot, he he's still doing us disservice because we know his mind. His mind is the slave is rotten from birth, and their soul is in jeopardy. Let me just read to you something that he says. He says, as people in the broad road generally are. Look, he says, look at the high and the low all the world over. It's the same story. The lower class used up body, soul, and spirit for the good of the upper. Uh, for the good of the upper. And before that, this is what I was actually trying to get to. He says, the fact is that the whole race are pretty generally understood to be turned over to the devil for our benefit in this world. However, it may turn out another. He doesn't care about the afterlife. He's focused on the here and now. And he says, these people are just given over to the devil. They are an emanation uh, of uh, of Satan. He says that's what he says. That's his thought, and that's the mind of some slave owners through the time. But he doesn't remember his focus isn't that spiritual realm. He's an existentialist. He's into existence now and free and determined self will now. For him, and that's all. That's all that he that matters. You know, as well as he treats the slaves, he's doing it out of some pretty, what I would say, conflicting the attitudes. He's not doing it out of a sense of equality and justice. So some of the Platonic ideas of good, he's doing it because he has low expectations. They're of the devil. They're rotten from birth. You know that I get some benefit, that my books stay in the black, icing on the cake. I'm not messing with it. Interesting conversation. Very dense chapter, chapter 18 in Uncle Tom's Cabin. And we're still not finished yet. Actually, this Ophelia experience goes over 2 chapters. So we're just walking our way through. So that's part 2. Right, part 3. Some interesting things are going to still come up that they think we just need some attention. And we ain't in no hurry out here. Okay. I'm Thomas Nyback, day 173 out of the way. Pleasure to be with you again. Sorry it's a late post, but I'm working on my schedule. Love you much, Larry. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.